This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 124, Hazel Homan, Part 1. On November 27, 2019, 27-year-old Kamee Dixon called 911 saying her stepdaughter had choked and was unresponsive. Sadly, the damage to 3-year-old Hazel Homan's brain was not survivable. After police found evidence of a pattern of abuse, Kamee was arrested and charged with her murder. This is the story of how child protection agencies failed a little girl who was removed from her parents' custody, placed with her grandparents for a year and a half, and returned to her father's home in June of 2019, only to die 5 months later. It's also the story of a precious 3-year-old girl with long brown hair, pinchable cheeks, and big brown eyes who loved baby shark, chicken nuggets, and playing with her toy ponies. This is part 1 of the heartbreaking story of Hazel Homan. I'd like to give a shout out to my newest patrons, Kelsey O. from Durham, North Carolina, Amber C. from Denver, Colorado, Allison R. from Clarksville, Tennessee, and from Castle Rock, thank you to Nikki F. Huge thank you to all of my patrons for your support. With your help, along with some freelance writing, I've been able to continue working from home, which allows me to keep making the podcast, so I can't thank you enough. If you'd like to help me keep the podcast going, you can make a pledge at patreon.com/stlcpod. This is going to be a pretty long episode, so I'll get right into Hazel's story. Hazel Journey Homan was born on March 13, 2016, to 17-year-old Medora Ann Peterson and 26-year-old Brandon D. Homan. It's not clear when they began their relationship, but for what it's worth, the age of consent in Washington state is 16. Hazel first came to the attention of the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families in 2017 when her mother, Medora, went to the emergency room. The reason for her hospital visit is unclear, but the hospital notified DCYF that Medora reported having a 1-year-old child who was being cared for by her paternal grandparents and who visited with her biological father weekly. DCYF did not open an investigation after this incident. Both parents have had some issues with drug abuse and the law, but one incident in particular bears mentioning. On the morning of Thursday, November 2, 2017, 27-year-old Brandon Homan was arrested following a 5-hour standoff, during which he allegedly held 19-year-old Medora and 19-month-old Hazel hostage in their apartment in the 2300 block of Queen Street in Bellingham, Washington. During the 5-hour standoff, which began at 2:30 a.m. and ended with Brandon's arrest around 7:15 a.m., tactical units surrounded an apartment building, employing such resources as a hostage negotiator and the Bellingham Police Department's Bearcat armored truck. Lieutenant Danette Beckley said in a statement, "Early this morning, we began investigating a possible domestic violence situation at the above location based on a phone call from a concerned family member. Information received was that a female had been assaulted and given a black eye by her boyfriend, and that the two had a small child with them." Brandon, who has been arrested a number of times before and since on charges including disorderly conduct, displaying a weapon, and robbery, was booked into Whatcom County Jail on a charge of 4th-degree assault. Hazel was unharmed, and Medora suffered minor facial injuries. 19-month-old Hazel was taken into protective custody, and DCYF initiated a dependency action because there was no available parent to care for Hazel due to the risk of child abuse or neglect if she was left in the home with her parents. From there, the Department of Social and Health Services placed Hazel in the home of Tammy and Dale Mortensen, who are Brandon's mother and her husband. At the time Hazel moved in with her grandparents, she had herpes on her mouth, and her teeth were rotting and infected. She also suffered from night terrors, but at 19 months old, she was too young for any kind of counseling. Tammy and Dale took it upon themselves to help their granddaughter heal. A court document later read, "The Mortensens nurtured Hazel back to health. The Mortensens would sit with Hazel at all hours of the night until she felt safe and comfortable enough to go back to bed. They secured much-needed medical care for Hazel and generally maintained a supportive and safe environment for this delicate little girl." To get Hazel back, Medora and Brandon would be required to participate in court-ordered services, as a later DCYF report stated, to ameliorate the concerns that led to the initial out-of-home placement. Throughout the process, Medora continued to struggle with drug abuse, which evidently led to her lack of engagement and participation with the court-ordered services. She initially denied using drugs and refused the services offered. Although she eventually attended a single session, she refused to return. DCYF reported having significant concerns for the mother's safety because there were indications she continued to have contact with the father despite a no-contact order being in place. DCYF referred Medora for further services, and she finally agreed to participate in an evaluation, treatment, and urine tests. DCYF even offered to provide transportation for some of Medora's appointments, but she continued to struggle with completing her court-ordered treatment. Because the Mortensens lived in another county, Medora rarely made it to her prearranged visitations with Hazel, even though DCYF arranged and funded her travel arrangements for these visitations. Tammy and Dale tried to ensure visitation between Medora and Hazel, even facilitating video chat just so Hazel could maintain a relationship with her mother. In March of 2018, Brandon was arrested for charges of disorderly conduct, fourth-degree assault, and displaying a weapon. In April, he began communicating with DCYF and Hazel's court-appointed special advocate, or CASA, and he agreed to participate with court-ordered services, making it known that he wanted to regain custody of his daughter. In the fall of 2018, Medora entered a court-ordered program to learn parenting skills and get treatment for drug addiction and mental health, but her participation in that program lasted only about a week. At that point, DCYF believed she moved to Iowa to live with her mother, and they were not able to contact Medora again after that. At some point after his breakup with Medora, Brandon started dating a woman named Kamee Dixon, who also had previous issues with drug addiction and run-ins with the law. Kamee apparently fought hard for Brandon to get Hazel back. In May of 2018, Brandon asked that Kamee be allowed to attend his visitations with Hazel, so DCYF did a background check and a child abuse history check on Kamee. She was ordered to go through some unspecified treatment, obtain independent housing, and get a job. When Kamee was successful at that, DCYF allowed her to attend Brandon and Hazel's supervised visitations. In July of 2018, Brandon's assault charge was dropped due to lack of cooperation from Medora, evidently because of her relocation to Iowa. In December, DCYF held a permanency planning meeting to review Brandon and Medora's progress and try to determine where Hazel would live on a permanent basis. Medora didn't show up, but Brandon did. Even though he had previously agreed to participate in services, his lack of consistent and measurable progress over the prior 12 months made DCYF think twice, especially considering the length of time Hazel had been living with her grandparents, where she was happy and healthy. After this meeting, Brandon began participating in services on an ongoing basis, which apparently impressed DCYF, along with his consistently drug-free urine tests as reported by his probation officer. He also maintained a full-time job and stable housing. When the agency conducted a walk-through home visit to determine the safety and suitability of the house, Kamee and her son, who was a couple years older than Hazel and who I'll call M, were present. Kamee said they did not live with Brandon full-time but would be a part of the household because she and Brandon intended to get married. According to statements later given to police by Kamee's best friend, Autumn Tucker, the family generally stayed at Brandon's home in Ferndale, but Kamee, who didn't work and who was supported by Brandon, kept a separate apartment in Bellingham in case their relationship fell apart and to maintain her independence. In March of 2019, Brandon was allowed overnight and weekend visits with Hazel in his home. 2 months later, a family team decision meeting was held to discuss reunification of Hazel with her father, who was making significant progress and demonstrating stability and the ability to provide for his family. The expanded visitation was going well, and according to DCYF, neither they nor Brandon's extended family had any concerns about domestic violence in his relationship with Kamee. He was also on a wait list for mental health services. Despite unannounced home visits by CASAs and Child and Family Welfare Services or CFWS caseworkers, everything seemed to be going beautifully in Brandon's home. He was already working to set up all of Hazel's medical providers and had a childcare plan for her while he worked. From the DCYF report, the relative caregivers reported no concerns and also supported reunification. DCYF identified the father's paramour as a support to him and the family. Other sources, however, reported there was a custody battle between Brandon and his mother. Hazel lived with Tammy and Dale for a year and a half. In their care, she was a healthy, happy, normal little girl. She and Dale regularly went to the park, where Hazel began to interact with other kids. She became chatty and learned to walk, and then to run. On June 19, 2019, Hazel was returned to her father on a trial basis, a court order that was supported by both DCYF and CASA. At that point, the family's case was transferred to a different CFWS caseworker, who was required to make 2 health and safety visits each month due to Hazel's young age. Because of Brandon's work schedule, most of the twice-monthly visits took place between the caseworker and Kamee with Hazel present. The caseworker reported no health and safety concerns, noting that Hazel was attending daycare and being taken to all of her routine doctor visits. When Hazel wasn't attending daycare, due to her dad's working hours, Kamee was Hazel's primary caretaker. According to family members, Brandon worked in construction about 2 hours from home, typically 6 days a week. In other words, Hazel spent a lot of time in Kamee's care. On August 3, 2019, a teenage cousin who was babysitting Hazel noticed and took photos of suspicious bruising on the little girl's chest and shoulders, as well as what looked like scarring from a cigarette burn. Hazel's cousin said Hazel would barely even let her take off her shirt. The same month, the family was referred for Triple P parent instruction, also known as the Positive Parenting Program, and began participating in the service. Later in August, when Kamee's best friend Autumn was visiting Kamee's apartment on Valencia Street in Bellingham, Hazel wet her pants. This apparently enraged Kamee, who shoved the tiny girl, naked, into a cold shower. Kamee continued yelling at Hazel that she couldn't get out of the shower until she promised Kamee she wouldn't have another accident. Autumn later told police that Hazel was in the shower for a long period of time and was in visible distress until she intervened to prevent any further injury to Hazel, telling Kamee that was enough. When Hazel was allowed out of the shower, her teeth were clenched and she was shivering from head to toe. At another child's birthday party that summer, Autumn also told police, Kamee became visibly angry, complaining that everyone was paying more attention to Hazel than her son, saying they were ignoring her son and treating Hazel better than him. The incident resulted in Kamee leaving the party early. The following month, Hazel's case was again transferred to a third CFWS worker. On September 30, 2019, the new caseworker contacted Brandon to schedule a health and safety visit. Brandon told the caseworker that about a week before, Hazel had burned her hand. When the caseworker met with Hazel and Kamee at Brandon's home the following day, Kamee explained that Hazel put her hand on a burner while they were cooking. The burn covered the entirety of Hazel's palm and fingers, all of which were bright red and blistering. When told they hadn't sought medical attention for Hazel's burn, the caseworker insisted they seek prompt medical attention. Kamee said she tried to take Hazel to a doctor but wasn't allowed because she wasn't Hazel's legal guardian, so the caseworker obtained permission from Brandon to allow Kamee to take his daughter to the doctor. On October 3rd, Hazel was seen by her primary care doctor, who referred her to Seattle Children's Hospital Clinic because it was possible Hazel might need physical therapy because of the severity of the burn. Because of mandatory reporting laws, medical staff notified CPS about the injury, triggering a 24-hour CPS response investigation, which was assigned right back to the CFWS worker. Normally, an investigation like this would be assigned to a CPS worker, but this decision was made due to CPS staffing shortages amidst an unusual influx in CPS reports triggering investigations. Besides, the CFWS worker was considered to be an unbiased evaluator of the family because she had only recently taken over from the previous worker. At some point, medical staff took a picture of the burn, which was later entered as evidence at trial. I'll include a screenshot of that evidence photo in the Facebook photo album for this episode. The caseworker met one-on-one with Hazel and ensured the family had scheduled an appointment at the Seattle Children's Hospital Clinic for October 14th. Then, on October 15th, Brandon called the caseworker to report that Hazel had sprayed something in her eye. The caseworker met the family at the emergency room where Hazel was treated for an alkaline chemical burn to her eye. Despite having kids myself for over 18 years now, I had no idea how serious this type of chemical burn can be. If I'd known when my kids were little, I probably would have been 10 times more paranoid than I already was about what my kids were able to get into. Alkali burns can be caused by several substances, including lime, ammonia, or lye, which is found in Drano, Liquid Plumber, and similar products. These caustic burns are actually worse than acid burns. According to Science Direct, when spilled in the eye, acid is quickly buffered by tissue and limited in penetration by precipitated proteins. Coagulation necrosis results, which is usually limited to the area of contact. Alkali, however, has a more rapid and deeper advancement, thereby causing progressive damage at the cellular level by combining with membrane lipids. Another article on the same website states, alkali burns of the eye produce some of the most severe injuries encountered in medicine. When a strong alkali contacts the eye, the epithelium is destroyed and allows the alkali access into the cornea. This produces immediate opacification of the cornea and coagulation of scleral and corneal proteins. The pH of the anterior chamber rises within 2 to 3 minutes, damaging the iris, lens, and ciliary body. This can lead to an irreversible blindness within 3 minutes of exposure. All sources emphasize the importance of immediate and copious irrigation of the eye with water or saline. At the emergency room, Hazel's eye was flushed, and she was discharged with a recommendation to follow up with an ophthalmologist weekly because she may have sustained permanent vision damage. When the CFWS caseworker questioned Brandon about the incident, he said he believed Hazel had sprayed hairspray in her eye. For the record, while it's not recommended to spray hairspray into your eyes, it certainly won't cause permanent vision damage like the caustic substances I mentioned a few moments ago. Brandon told the caseworker he had a plan to move all chemicals and beauty products out of Hazel's reach. When the caseworker made a health and safety visit the next day, all dangerous products had been put away where Hazel couldn't reach them. When the caseworker asked about Hazel's hand, the little girl said it felt okay, but the caseworker noted that she still couldn't put full weight on the hand. Autumn Tucker later told police she invited Kamee in late October to carve pumpkins with the kids, during which she witnessed Kamee's son push Hazel to the ground, making the little girl cry. Instead of admonishing her son, Kamee punished Hazel for the incident. The CFWS caseworker conducted another health and safety visit in the home on November 13, 2019, during which Brandon said he had started using a new shampoo for Hazel because her hair was thinning, and he thought the shampoo was working. He believed the hair loss was due to the transition from her grandparents' home to his and being in a new environment. Hair loss can be a sign of child abuse. In traumatic hair loss, it's usually accompanied by bruising, discoloration, or tenderness of the scalp, but there's no indication in the DCYF report I read that the caseworker examined Hazel's scalp. The report went on to say that no other injuries or medical concerns were noted at the November 13th visit, and the caseworker did not request any additional information about Hazel's burned hand or injured eye either. The caseworker did, however, have a candid discussion with Brandon about a court hearing coming up in December, at which she said DCYF would not be recommending case dismissal due to Brandon's inconsistent participation with parenting instruction, as well as a court-ordered mental evaluation not being done. The daycare in Bellingham that Hazel attended had logged multiple significant absences for the little girl, whereas at his daycare, Kamee's son M had a near-perfect attendance record. Brandon told the caseworker that Hazel would be back in full-time daycare as of November 27th, that he had scheduled his mental health evaluation for November 21st, and that he had also scheduled an appointment with the PPP provider. The day after the visit, the PPP provider sent notice to the family and to DCYF that the agency's referral was being returned because the family had missed yet another appointment. At 9:16 on the morning of November 27, 2019, the day before Thanksgiving, Bellingham police officers responded to a home in the 2100 block of Texas Street and found 3-year-old Hazel Homan unresponsive, naked, and wet. 27-year-old Kamee Dixon told them her stepdaughter choked on food and went limp at their apartment, which was just around the corner on Valencia Street. When her attempts at the Heimlich maneuver failed to revive Hazel, Kamee said, she couldn't find her cell phone, so she ran to her neighbor's apartment for help. Hazel was taken to the emergency room at St. Joseph's Medical Center, where her temperature was measured at approximately 86 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 degrees Celsius. A Bellingham crime scene investigator noticed the toddler's body was covered with bruises and at least one cigarette burn. A doctor asked the investigator if there were any pill bottles in the home that Hazel may have had access to, or anything else that may have been dangerous to the girl, because at that point what was wrong with her was a medical mystery. When the investigator contacted a detective, the detective told him there were peanuts on the floor in the children's rooms and what appeared to be drug paraphernalia in the living room. Medical staff found Hazel was suffering from bleeding on the brain and hypothermia, and once she was stabilized, she was airlifted to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle for more specialized treatment, where medical staff determined that Hazel suffered from injuries similar to shaken baby syndrome. Until I started research for this episode, I didn't know hypothermia could be a presenting symptom of shaken baby syndrome. According to a study of 20 cases by Ludwig and Warman in 1984, 9 of the 20 shaken babies studied, or 45%, were hypothermic. Other, more recent studies have shown a lower incidence of hypothermia in shaken children, but it does appear, based on the medical literature, that severe brain injury can cause a severe drop in body temperature. On November 29, 2019, a child abuse pediatrician at Harborview told investigators that Hazel had suffered bilateral subdural hemorrhages consistent with shaken baby syndrome, and that her injuries could not have been caused by anything other than that. Despite the 911 caller's claim that Hazel may have choked on something, there were no signs of choking present, and the doctors suspected the little girl had been physically abused. They felt her brain injuries had been inflicted very shortly before she lost consciousness that morning while she was in the sole care of Kamee Dixon while Brandon was at work. When Hazel was airlifted to the hospital in Seattle, Brandon went with her while Bellingham Detective Wagner interviewed Kamee. Hazel was placed into Seattle Children's Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, where she was placed on life support and diagnosed as having both bilateral subdural brain hemorrhage and anoxic brain injury, which means a complete lack of oxygen to the brain for a period of time. 2 brain death assessments were conducted, and on November 30, 2019, at just 3.5 years old, Hazel Journey Homan was declared legally brain dead. Her body remained on life support until December 4th for the purpose of organ donation. The King County Medical Examiner's Office performed a skeletal survey, which found multiple bone fractures, including a broken finger, wrist, knee, hip bone, and multiple vertebrae. All of the fractures had occurred within the 6 months prior to Hazel's death, and all showed signs of healing. During their investigation, police discovered previous Child Protective Service reports that painted a grim picture of Hazel's life, from the incident in which Brandon held Hazel and her mother hostage to Hazel's various injuries while in the care of her father and Kamee Dixon. Some witnesses mentioned in the police reports said that in the weeks leading up to Hazel's death, they suspected Kamee had relapsed into drug use after years of being clean. One man told investigators that Kamee told him that on the morning of the 911 call, she was extremely frustrated as she was coming down from heroin. According to some witnesses, both Kamee and Brandon had been using heroin for the year leading up to Hazel's death. Despite the belief of detectives that Kamee was responsible for Hazel's fatal injury, Kamee's attorney, Emily Beshen, told Q13 that many of the details in the police reports were either disputed or included without the complete context. Pointing out that a medical examiner had not yet determined Hazel's cause of death, the attorney stressed the point that accusations of shaken baby syndrome had caused wrongful arrests of innocent people in the past. To back up her claims of her client's innocence, Ms. Beshen sent the news station several videos of Kamee interacting with Hazel in what appeared to be a loving manner. One such video shows Kamee holding Hazel and kissing her repeatedly on the cheek, which you'll hear in this audio clip.
Hazel, who went potty?
I went potty.
You went potty! Yes! Say hi, baby.
Hi.
Are you a sweet girl? Say, I'm a sweet girl.
I picked you.
I'm precious.
I played this.
And are we going to play with chalk right now?
Yeah.
Okay, I love you.
I love you.
Hazel's autopsy report stated that she suffered from significant long-term abuse. The medical examiner found bruising on her groin, chin, neck, and chest, in addition to the multiple healing broken bones discovered during the skeletal scan. The preliminary information turned up by the autopsy and by the investigation led police to believe little Hazel had suffered repeated abuse at the hands of her father's fiancé. According to a release by Public Information Officer Claudia Murphy of the Bellingham Police Department, on December 5, 2019, Kamee Dixon was arrested without incident in the 4100 block of Cordata Parkway. Kamee was booked into Whatcom County Jail, charged with second-degree murder. After Kamee's arrest, Brandon defended her in the media, telling Q13, "Only the true people know what kind of mother she was to my daughter and to our kids. We love our kids with all of our heart." Saying he had questions about what happened, Brandon still doubled down, insisting Kamee never abused his daughter. "This is a tragic situation. More than anyone, I am the father. It's my baby girl. I want answers too. But don't place blame." Hazel's maternal grandfather, Jason Peterson, also spoke to Q13, talking about how he lived with Hazel for the first year of her life and how it was hard to find a picture of his granddaughter in which she wasn't smiling. "This little girl, if you were sad, she would crawl up on your lap and she would hum and she would love you." Jason wept as he said, "The last time I saw her, it was in the hospital with a bunch of tubes sticking out." When Kamee appeared in court the day after her arrest, Whatcom County Criminal Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Eric Sigmar requested bail of $2 million, saying the defendant was particularly dangerous due to the level of traumatic violence and abuse she inflicted on Hazel, eventually causing her death. The prosecutor said in court, "The court found probable cause that the defendant committed murder in the second degree against a 3-year-old girl, and it wouldn't be uncommon for a prosecutor such as myself to ask the court for $1 million bail for a serious violent offense. But this case is different. The victim was especially vulnerable and played no part in the turn of events leading to her stepmother literally shaking the life out of her." Regarding the $2 million bail he requested, Mr. Sigmar added, "I would not be offended if you set it higher." Whatcom County Public Defender's Office Director Stark Follis, who represented Kamee at the hearing, said the defendant was born and raised in Whatcom County and had deep ties to the area, adding that Kamee's 5-year-old son had been placed into the care of CPS, but there were no prior claims of abuse or neglect against him. He argued that Kamee was not a flight risk nor a danger to the community at large. He said, "I do understand and agree with Mr. Sigmar that this is an emotional case. It has certainly caused the community some concern. However, it is not a case that reflects a general danger to the community, and that's what bail is all about. It seems rather inconceivable she would commit another offense given the circumstances of this case." At the hearing, the court heard from Hazel's grandfather, Jason, who said he didn't feel Kamee should get bail based on the ongoing pattern of abuse against Hazel. "My granddaughter, I'll never be able to hold or see or visit with again. I'm heartbroken and I'm torn apart, and Hazel needs justice." Hazel's father, Brandon, also spoke at the hearing, asking the judge to set a lower bail so Kamee could be with her son. He described his girlfriend as his cheerleader and the biggest part of their family. The 4 of them dressed up together for Halloween in homemade costumes, and he and Kamee put their children first. Kamee, Brandon told the judge, was not going to run, and he asked the judge to acknowledge that Kamee's son was struggling to deal with his mother's arrest. Brandon said, "This tragic situation, I don't have an answer for. I don't, and that's my baby girl, and that's her mom. I wish I had answers, but I don't. Kamee helped handle and treated Hazel like her own from the beginning. We never abused our kids. I had CPS so far on me. If there was neglect, then why weren't they there?" The judge, Whatcom County Court Commissioner Leon F. Henley, Jr., chastised Brandon, pointing out that he was there to address Kamee's bail, not her guilt or innocence. Kamee's father, Kamee Dixon, also spoke at the bail hearing, saying he was proud of his daughter for helping raise the children. In the end, Judge Henley found probable cause to proceed with the case. He set Kamee's bail at $1 million and scheduled her arraignment for December 13th. On December 17, 2019, a service of remembrance was held for Hazel Journey Homan at Christ the King Community Church in Bellingham. During the service, a slideshow of photos was displayed, including multiple photos of Hazel and Kamee together. Kamee Nicole Dixon, who was born on February 23, 1992, apparently put a lot of energy into keeping up appearances on social media, trying her hardest to appear to be a loving, doting, involved mom and stepmom. On September 16, 2019, Kamee posted an image on Facebook that read, "I don't have stepkids. I have kids who happened to be born before I met them." She included the following caption addressed to Hazel. "You changed my life in so many ways. You're a blessing to everyone you come in contact with. You bring me twice the smiles, twice the love, twice the happiness, twice the snuggles, twice the laughter, twice the attitude, and even sometimes twice the headaches. But you have brought so much more to me and Em's lives, and I will never regret pushing your daddy as hard as I did to get you back. You needed to be with us just like we needed to have you. My favorite turkey butt." As we often see in these awful cases, Kamee also appeared to be a protective parent based on her online posts. Kamee posted a meme of a man squinting at a minuscule piece of paper, which was captioned, "A list of people I trust to babysit my child." In a post on October 26, 2019, Kamee uploaded a video showing Hazel in her car seat, bopping back and forth to the music playing in the car while she ate. Kamee's caption read, "I would love for somebody to try to tell me that this ain't my child right here. Sitting here getting it, gigging, eating her chicken and cheese quesadilla. Mama girl. Hashtag pride and joy. Hashtag pumpkin carving time." As is too often the case when it comes to Facebook versus real life, things aren't always as they seem. Kamee also made a lot of posts with and about her best friend Autumn. The two spent a lot of time together with their kids, and Kamee even supported Autumn when she lost her daughter. Kamee's arrest clearly hit Autumn hard. In one post, she commented, "It's seriously not fair and unimaginable to lose my best friend like this. She encouraged me to have strength and cheered me on for so many things. Checked on me at just the right times, knew how to make me smile in the hardest times. She was family to me." Hazel's Aunt Ashley responded to Autumn, saying, "Your feelings are okay and valid. You do not need to explain or apologize to anyone for having those feelings. Just as you guys feel the way you do about her, I feel the same way about my brother. Best believe I miss him, and when I see him in pain, all I want to do is be his big sis and take it all away. We cannot help the way we feel." The two women also discussed how much they loved Hazel. Ashley said, "I loved that baby girl as if I had her myself. I have a special connection with Bug and poured all my love into her because I, too, did not have a mother or a father and was raised by my grandparents." Autumn added, "Amen. Hazel was pure kindness, literally melted hearts." After Hazel's death, her maternal grandmother, Carrie Wolfe, took to Facebook to find her daughter, Medora Peterson, who hadn't been in contact with her family in some time and was not yet aware of her daughter's death. Medora was described as being 21 years old, Caucasian, Hispanic, and Native American, slender with dark brown eyes, and bald, although she wore various wig hairstyles. She was last seen in Des Moines, Iowa. This was by no means the first time Medora had taken off without telling her family where she was going. Her worried family members had posted in March of 2019 as well about looking for Medora, who was struggling with heroin addiction and spending time with friends who enabled her and made excuses for her rather than trying to help her. It's clear Medora's family loves her very much and has tried very hard to help her get her life on track, but unfortunately, she seems, like a lot of young people, unwilling to accept their help or to help herself. It's not clear when Medora found out that Hazel had died, but a few days later, in mid-December of 2019, she was arrested in Polk County, Iowa on a trespassing charge, to which she ultimately pleaded guilty in March of 2020. Medora has had other problems with the law both before and since. Her first charge as an adult in Washington state was disorderly conduct in November of 2016, followed by an assault in December of 2017 and a couple of other charges over the next 2 years, after which she apparently relocated to Iowa. In May of 2019, Medora pleaded guilty to a charge of assault on persons in certain occupations causing bodily injury. Since then, she was charged with probation violation, 2 charges of interference with official acts, consumption of alcohol in a public place, trespassing, theft, 4 more charges of assault on persons in certain occupations causing bodily injury, aggravated theft, assault, 2 counts of assault causing bodily injury or mental illness, and first-degree burglary. She spent 7 months in jail starting in 2020, and since February of 2022, Medora has been incarcerated in the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women in Mitchellville, the same prison that houses Cheyenne Harris. We learned about Cheyenne when I told you the story of her infant son, Sterling Cohen, in episodes 100 and 101. Medora's tentative release date is listed as October 7, 2026. I sincerely hope she's able to take control of her life, overcome her addictions, and accept the love her family obviously has for her. On December 13, 2019, even though the King County Medical Examiner had not yet ruled on the official cause and manner of Hazel's death, Kamee was arraigned in Whatcom County Superior Court, where she was charged with homicide by abuse and second-degree murder. The homicide by abuse charge incorporated Kamee's alleged past abuse of Hazel, stating that between June 2nd and November 27, 2019, under circumstances manifesting in extreme indifference to human life, Kamee caused Hazel's death while engaging in a pattern or practice of assault or torture. The homicide charge included aggravating factors that Hazel was a household member, that Kamee used her position of trust and responsibility to commit the crime, and that Hazel was particularly vulnerable or incapable of resistance due to her age. Aggravating factors, if the defendant is convicted, give the court the ability to sentence either higher or lower than the standard range for the crime in question. The second-degree murder charge stated that on November 27th, Kamee committed or attempted to commit second-degree assault, and in the commission of that crime, she caused Hazel's death. The murder charge included the same 3 aggravating factors as the homicide charge, but it also included a component of domestic violence, that the murder was part of an ongoing pattern of psychological or physical abuse, and that Kamee's behavior manifested deliberate cruelty or intimidation of her 3-year-old stepdaughter. Prosecutor Eric Sigmar explained that despite the lack of official cause and manner of death, his office filed charges based on probable cause affidavits and the information they had available to them at the time. At the arraignment hearing, Kamee's tentative trial date was set for February 3, 2020, but it would be another 2 years until she actually faced a jury for her crimes. On Wednesday, January 23, 2020, the King County Medical Examiner's Office officially ruled Hazel's death a homicide caused by blunt force trauma to the head. The medical examiner found over 50 injuries on Hazel's body, all at various stages of healing. The following day, Kamee Dixon pleaded not guilty in Whatcom County Superior Court to the charges against her. After the hearing, grandfather Jason Peterson told Q13,
"That child was walking around in pain for the last 6 months. The skeletal exam they did shows that there was broken hips, broken knees, wrists broken. I just don't understand how anybody could hurt her. When I hear her say not guilty with no look on her face, it infuriates me."
Jason said he blamed CPS for taking Hazel out of her grandmother's home and returning her to her father.
They took her out of a kind and loving home where she was always happy. If you go to the hospital, that should be an immediate home visit, and if it's questionable, they should be taken. I'm going to miss everything about her.
I hope that every bad thing that happened to her comes to light and everybody responsible pays for it. The news station tried to follow up with Brandon about how he felt about Kamee after all of the allegations made against her, but he had apparently lawyered up and refused to comment. Q13 repeatedly reached out to CPS about the allegations, and at last, in January, CPS Secretary Ross Hunter granted an interview to the news station, in which he provided exactly 0 information to the reporter's questions about the agency's involvement with Hazel's family.
Did you guys get referrals about Hazel Homan in the last 6 months of her life?
So the answer that I'm going to give you about specific cases is that you need to run those individual questions through our normal public disclosure.
In late October, when she went to the hospital and she got that hand burn, we are hearing that CPS did not follow up on that report. Is that true?
Ma'am, I can't answer questions about specific cases without having a legal review of what I'm allowed to say about whom.
There's a 3-year-old girl who died here.
There's a 3-year-old girl who died here. It is awful.
We cannot forget that.
So I come to work every day and read these reports. It's not something you forget, right?
So is there anything that you want to say about her death?
Her death, the death of other children in this scenario is awful. We review cases, we review fatality cases, we review near fatality cases. So if every time there's a concern, we remove a child, we damage an enormous number of children. On the other end of the spectrum, if we never remove children, we leave children in situations that is incredibly risky. So our job is not to go to one end or the other end of this. Our job is to find the right balance. You can't really have transparency because all these kids have privacy rights. The parents have privacy rights. The foster parents have privacy rights. My job is to build a system that works better than the system that I inherited.
On the subject of CPS, in one of the many forums I dug through during my research for Hazel's case, I found a December 2019 post from someone in Washington state who wrote, "I currently have a foster child in my care, and CPS is designed and held to policy, which is ridiculous. The name is Child Protective Services, but what actually happens is CPS is designed to serve the parents of the children, and the children are given one person, the guardian ad litem, who represents and fights for the children and their well-being. I, fortunately, have an amazing GAL who really does fight for the best interest of my foster son. But when the GAL is outmatched by CPS, it's likely that the child will be returned repeatedly to a dangerous situation. CPS granted visitation to my foster child's mother despite the mother nodding out during the visits, despite the mother having active warrants. So no, CPS doesn't protect the babies. It's actually not what they are designed to do." Another user responded, "I worked with CASA for a while before I realized we were just pawns helping to keep the funds coming in for the people who ran the program. They told us straight up the state will always try to place the child back with the parents. It's cheaper than trying to foster them." In other words, it's the same story everywhere that we've heard countless times before. In February, Kamee's attorney, Emily Beshan, said in an emailed statement to the Bellingham Herald that both her client and Brandon Homan had concerns about Hazel's health in the weeks leading up to her death. Both Brandon and Kamee had brought her to different doctor's appointments. During October, the physician notes Hazel is playful and appears well cared for. In November, a social worker spends time alone with Hazel and notes she had no concerning marks. Neither expressed concerns of Hazel being tortured. Although Hazel's service of remembrance was held on December 17, 2019, she was neither buried nor cremated immediately. Her father, Brandon, wanted to cremate his daughter, but Kamee Dixon's defense attorneys had fought to prevent it, saying they needed to preserve further evidence for the pending murder trial. Because of this battle, an emergency stay of cremation was placed on Hazel's remains in mid-December. In early February, prosecutor Eric Sigmar asked the court to lift the stay on the grounds that the defense had already had plenty of time to hire experts and conduct an independent examination of Hazel's body. He argued that all relevant evidence had been preserved and that Hazel's family should be allowed to cremate her. He cited emails he had received in support of lifting the stay of cremation, both from the funeral home and from an advocacy group called Support Officer Community Care, which Brandon Homan was working with. Support Officer Executive Director Kendra Cristelli wrote, "The fact that this has taken so long is wrong. It's wrong that she suffered in life and is now a pawn in a game of chess between attorneys. This is not justice." Despite the apparent conflict of interest, however, Brandon continued to support Kamee's innocence. When the court lifted the emergency stay, Kamee's attorneys sought review by a higher court, which delayed Hazel's cremation yet again until at least March 5th. According to Kamee's attorneys, they weren't seeking to prevent Hazel's burial, just the permanent destruction of evidence that may be relevant to Kamee's court case. Without the autopsy report and specifics of the allegations against their client, the attorneys argued that they didn't know which experts they should hire or what evidence they may need to examine, which was why they felt the stay of cremation should remain in effect. Nonetheless, Brandon was ultimately permitted to cremate his daughter. He distributed the ashes amongst a few family members. Also in March of 2020, in honor of what would have been Hazel's 4th birthday on March 13th, family and friends got together for a Moana-themed party where they celebrated with cake and a slideshow of photos of Hazel. They've continued to celebrate her birthday each year since her passing. The same month, Kamee's defense team requested a reduction in bail from $1 million to $10,000, using COVID-19 as their reasoning. The request was denied. Also in March, the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families commissioned a committee to conduct a child fatality review of Hazel's case. The purpose of the review was to examine the practices and processes of DCYF and the department's handling of Hazel and her family. The findings by the committee were as follows. The committee concluded there was no critical error. The committee did, however, make the following findings. The assignment of the 24-hour CPS investigation should have been assigned to a CPS caseworker and not the ongoing CFWS caseworker. DCYF did not call in an intake for either the burn or eye injury. The intake for the burn was called in by a medical professional, and no intake was called in for the eye injury. The assessment of Ms. Dixon, who was also considered a member of the household, was not comprehensive, did not include an assessment of her current needs, and did not offer services. DCYF neglected to document efforts to engage Ms. Dixon with the dependency process as a member of the household and a caregiver who would have unsupervised access to the child. There was a lack of communication with the CASAs and a delay in sharing information about Hazel's injuries and the CPS investigation in October 2019. Essentially, the committee recommended more training for CFWS workers and improved communication among DCYF and CASAs. At the time of Hazel's death, the CWFS worker assigned to her case was responsible for 24 cases, which was the highest caseload of all the caseworkers within the CWFS program. The jury trial for Kamee Nicole Dixon began in late March of 2022 with jury selection. Both sides gave their opening statements on Monday, April 11, 2022, in Whatcom County Superior Court. Kamee was represented by defense attorneys Emily Beshin and Douglas Hildahl. During her opening remarks, Ms. Beshin called Hazel's death a tragic accident, claiming that the little girl choked on a breakfast sandwich Kamee gave her and that the lack of oxygen to her brain ultimately killed her. They were raising her to be an independent young girl, not stopped by her disabilities. She lived an active life during her last 6 months. This is not a plot to a movie. Inventing dramatic versions of events will not aid you as jurors in determining the truth. This is real life, and these are real people. I found her comment about Hazel's disabilities odd. I've been able to find absolutely nothing indicating Hazel had any disabilities other than strabismus, which is a condition in which the eyes don't point in the same direction. She wore a tiny pair of glasses to correct this, but otherwise I found nothing. The defense attorney went through her side's version of the events of November 27, 2019, saying that around 8:15 a.m., Kamee left Brandon's home in Ferndale with her son and Hazel, stopping to buy the kids breakfast sandwiches on the way to dropping her son off at school. Around 8:45, she and Hazel went to Kamee's Bellingham apartment, where Hazel took a shower and then sat down in front of the couch to eat her breakfast sandwich while Kamee went through paperwork. The attorney said that when Kamee got up to check on Hazel, she found the little girl slumped over, not breathing. She splashed water on Hazel's face, thumped on her back, and attempted to clear her airway, but Hazel was unresponsive. Ms. Beshin said that Kamee couldn't find her cell phone, so she wrapped Hazel in a blanket and ran with her to a neighbor's apartment for help. The neighbor called 911 while someone else in the apartment performed CPR until paramedics arrived to take Hazel to nearby St. Joseph's Hospital. The attorney said that Hazel had stopped breathing and gone into cardiac arrest. From the time she started choking until medical staff recovered a pulse at the hospital, her brain was without oxygen for over an hour. She claimed that evidence would show markings on Hazel's body that were mistaken for abuse were actually a skin pigmentation issue and marks from life-saving intervention by medical staff. At Harborview in Seattle, Ms. Beshin said, a doctor concluded that the bleeding and clotting from Hazel's bilateral subdural hematoma had not caused her brain death. Rather, it was caused by her cardiac arrest and the prolonged period of time her brain went without oxygen. The attorney explained that the fractures to nearly the entirety of Hazel's thoracic spine were compression fractures like those seen in people with osteoporosis or children with cerebral palsy or other serious health conditions. She claimed that Hazel's spine was diseased and that her fractures were caused by underlying conditions. She also claimed that the medical examiner did not rule out choking as Hazel's cause of death. The attorney expected several witnesses to testify that at a court hearing in December of 2019, they heard the prosecutor say that Dixon had literally shaken the life out of Hazel Homan. They heard the prosecuting attorney say she had cigarette burns to her body, fractures, and evidence of abuse. Only a complete monster would burn a child with cigarettes and beat them so badly to have a fractured spine and fractures all over their body. I anticipate the evidence will show that there is no such monster in this case. In his opening statement, Chief Criminal Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Eric Sigmar said that Kamee hit Hazel until she suffered a traumatic brain injury that caused her death. He said that in 2017, DCYF had found both of Hazel's biological parents, Medora Peterson and Brandon Homan, unfit to parent her, leading to Hazel's removal from their home and placement with her paternal grandparents, Tammy and Dale Mortensen, for most of her first 3 years. During her time with her grandparents, Hazel showed no signs of being repeatedly sick or injured, and she lived the life of a normal toddler. 5 months before she died, Hazel was returned to her father, and in those 5 months, DCYF met with Hazel at least 11 times. Mr. Sigmar said, "That placement would result in 5 months of severe injuries and ultimately cost Hazel her life." The prosecutor said that Kamee Dixon cared for Hazel while Brandon went to work at a refinery, and that evidence would show that Kamee resented being left alone at home with Hazel, who she saw as problematic. Mr. Sigmar also noticed the injuries the defense wanted to explain away. He said in August of 2019, Hazel's cousin noticed a bruise on Hazel's back and told an adult. When Tammy and Dale Mortensen mentioned their concerns, Brandon and Kamee cut them off and began isolating Hazel from them and other family members. In September of 2019, in Kamee's care, Hazel suffered a burn to her hand. Kamee did not take Hazel for treatment for days, and when she was finally seen by a doctor, they referred Hazel to a burn clinic in Seattle. At the burn clinic, where Hazel was seen over a week after her hand was injured, doctors also noticed Hazel appeared to have an eye injury and instructed Brandon and Kamee to have it looked at immediately. 3 days later, when Hazel was taken for medical care for her eye, the eye doctor determined Hazel had suffered an alkaline injury or chemical burn to her eye, and that there was a significant delay in obtaining medical care for the injury. The prosecutor said that while Kamee cared for Hazel alone, she inflicted head trauma on the toddler. When a child abuse physician was called in for suspected abuse, she determined there was no other explanation for Hazel's injury than inflicted, abusive head trauma. "I expect the evidence to show that the constellation of injuries to this 3-year-old child will graphically demonstrate that her death was no accident. What was observed on autopsy and all of these injuries do not represent a coincidence. Quite the opposite. The number of injuries, timing of injuries, and severity of those injuries condensed during that period of time when Hazel was alone with the defendant reveal abuse and repeated assaults inflicted on a vulnerable child who should have been safe, secure, and protected." Kamee's trial took longer than anyone anticipated, over 3 months. In addition to medical experts and others, multiple family members were called to testify. Anyone listed as a potential witness was not allowed to attend the trial because the prosecution did not want anyone's testimony tainted in any way by hearing any other testimony or any remarks from the attorneys. One potential witness, Hazel's maternal grandpa, Jason Peterson, told Q13 during the trial, "There is so much I don't know, and there's so much I'm not allowed to know. Like, if I know someone is testifying, I can't talk to them. So it leaves me in a dark room pretty much, wondering what's going on with the murmurs I hear in the next room. I'm broken. I'm broken in a way that isn't safe. It isn't okay. If you can't find joy in your day-to-day life anymore, what's the point?" Brandon Homan was finally called to the stand on Tuesday, June 7th, testifying that Hazel was born by emergency C-section, which he said may have set off her possible health issues. "My daughter came out blue, purple, and unconscious. A miracle that she was here." He explained that Hazel was taken by CPS due to his trouble with law enforcement, and that Kamee consistently tried to help him regain custody, which was successful in June of 2019, after Hazel spent a year and a half with his mother and stepfather, Tammy and Dale Mortensen. Brandon's testimony continued into the next day. On the stand, he wept as videos and photos of Hazel were shown to the court as evidence of what the defense said was a loving relationship between Kamee and Hazel. Brandon said he loved my little girl more than anything in this world. When the prosecution questioned Brandon about his involvement with DCYF and CPS, the following exchange took place. "Regarding DCYF or CPS, you understood the requirements to report injuries, correct?" "Yes." "That was impressed upon you, the importance of doing that, correct?" "Yes." "You never reported bruising to Hazel, did you?" "No." "Never reported a head wound to Hazel?" "No." "Never reported a broken bone in her leg?" "I wasn't aware, no." "Never reported a broken bone in her arm?" "I wasn't aware, no." "Never reported a broken finger?" "No." "Never reported fractures throughout her spine?" "No." "And when Kamee reported to you that Hazel was black and blue on November 20th, 2019, you did not report that to CPS, correct?" "No." Defense attorneys asked Brandon to clarify what he knew about Hazel's broken bones, to which he testified, "I was unaware. I had never seen signs of my daughter in any pain or distress, irritation, or else I would have been on it. The exact same way when she got something in her eye, same when she burned her hand." The defense also asked Brandon what he would do if he knew Hazel was in danger in the following exchange. "If you were dating somebody who you believe was hurting your daughter, what would you do?" "I would move. I would take her out of the situation." "Did you ever see any indication of injuries that you believed looked suspicious for child abuse?" "No, and I talked to my daughter frequently." Kamee Dixon herself took the stand the same week to testify about the loving relationship she claimed to have with Hazel. She shared some of her happy memories of Hazel, walking the court through several videos featuring her and Hazel.
That's Hazel and I in the doctor's office.
You recognize that
Yes,
video?
I do.
On what day did that?
That one was taken on July 31st, and we had stayed the night at Lummi Island, and she's saying good morning, and we're sitting at my grandma's breakfast table. What are you doing, baby?
It's a boat.
Are you on a boat?
Yeah.
You having fun, baby?
Yeah.
Kamee told the court that Hazel loved getting dolled up with her and putting on pretty dresses. She testified that she was raising Hazel alongside her own son. Kamee described one photo, saying, "This is a picture of me and both the kids. We went to trampoline zone and we were really hot from jumping around so much. And there's this hurricane machine. It blows air on you to cool you down. That's what this picture is." She also described an incident in which Hazel was injured from a fall, saying her son and Hazel were playing at the top of a staircase at an apartment complex when Hazel fell down the stairs. Rather than screaming in pain, though, she said Hazel reacted shocked and confused. She did, Kamee said, notify Brandon about the fall, and she also kept him informed of other things relating to Hazel's health. Her defense attorney asked, "If something were to happen, if Hazel were to get sick or be injured, what would you do about that? Would you tell anybody?" Kamee replied, "Yes, Brandon and I had regular communication. Anytime anything was going on with Hazel while she was in my care, Brandon and I would be communicating about it, whether that was being sick or if she had an accident or fell down." On the morning she claimed Hazel choked on her breakfast sandwich, Kamee said, she found Hazel slumped over and unresponsive, so she opened Hazel's blocked jaw with her hands, saw food lodged in her throat, and scooped it out. Even so, she said, Hazel wasn't breathing. "I remember grabbing her body and throwing it over my arm and pounding on her back, thinking maybe some food would come up or something. That didn't help, so then I'm like, well, what do? Do I do CPR? So I'm not a medical professional, I'm not trained, and I wish that I would have been. But I figured if she wasn't choking, then she needed CPR, so I began to do CPR." Another defense witness called to the stand was Dr. Evan Matches, an anatomic and forensic pathologist from California who traveled to Seattle to analyze Hazel's bones and review her autopsy report and over 4,500 pages of documents. The doctor said he requested a test for vitamin D in Hazel's blood samples, which returned results that made it appear Hazel had extremely low vitamin D levels. When a defense attorney asked why he believed Hazel had a vitamin D deficiency, Dr. Matches replied, "The appearance of her bones at the naked eye, the appearance of her bones under the microscope, and the vitamin D level that was reported to me." A vitamin D deficiency, the pathologist explained, can cause bones to weaken and become fragile. However, on cross-examination, the prosecution asked Dr. Matches if the vitamin D specimen tested could have been compromised if it wasn't preserved and stored properly, and the pathologist agreed the specimen could degrade over time under these conditions. Dr. Matches also testified that the King County Medical Examiner's Office treated Hazel's bones with a mild acid, which was a standard practice in investigations like these. The prosecution asked the pathologist if this could have been a factor in the weakened appearance of Hazel's bones, and also mentioned that Hazel had never been diagnosed with a metabolic bone disease. The doctor said he could not rule out a metabolic disease in Hazel's case. On June 13th, the defense called its star expert witness, Texas forensic pathologist Dr. Satish Chandru, who testified that in his belief, Hazel's death should be ruled an accident or undetermined because it is impossible to tell if an injury is inflicted or accidental. On Tuesday, June 21st, prosecutor Eric Sigmar gave his closing arguments, during which he showed a series of exhibits, including text messages, videos, and photos. One of the pictures was of Hazel's burned hand, appearing blistered in an angry shade of red, taken at a doctor's office. He reminded the jury that the burn happened under Kamee's supervision, but it wasn't reported until 11 days after the injury occurred.
Hazel sustained catastrophic traumatic head injury. That's what stopped her heart, that's what stopped her breathing, and that's what led to her hospitalization on November 27.
The medical examiner showed you overwhelming evidence of trauma, including 50 blows to Hazel, injuries of varying ages, clear evidence of recent inflicted trauma. There is no evidence Hazel choked. The choking story does not make sense. The prosecutor also told the jury that Hazel was isolated from her family, friends, and daycare providers if she had bruises on her body.
The injuries to Hazel Homan were severe. Beyond the bruises to her head and body in various stages of healing, she suffered from numerous fractures. You heard from defense expert Dr. Evan Matches that Hazel had suffered fractures in virtually every one of her thoracic vertebrae. The fractures to Hazel's long bones, the arm and leg fracture, would have been, in his words, exquisitely painful at the time that they were fractured. Yet there's no evidence of Hazel having received medical care.
The defense planned to give its closing arguments, during which they planned to show short clips of testimony heard during the trial. The judge reviewed their plan and put a stop to it, telling them they could not play the clips. The defense requested and were granted a recess for the rest of the day to rework their closing arguments. When they did present their closing before the court, defense attorney Doug Hildahl further pushed the accidental choking theory, showing a video recorded by doctors inside Hazel's throat and saying,
If we go forward a little bit, we can see something. I don't know what that is, but it looks a lot like scrambled egg to me.
He mentioned that the King County medical examiner's testimony was not heard during the trial and posited the reason for this.
All of the experts agreed that when you're assessing whether there's been some sort of inflicted trauma, abusive head trauma, child abuse, whatever label is put on it, that an investigation is important. You didn't hear from Nathan Gerdes. And the reason you didn't hear from Nathan Gerdes is that no investigation was done. He didn't go to the scene. He didn't talk to any witnesses. Not to Kamee. Not to Brandon. No investigation was done.
Mr. Hildahl also mentioned Dr. Evan Match's testimony about Hazel's supposed vitamin D deficiency.
He testified that the child had undermineralized bones. He said that his opinion was based on three things: the gross appearance of the bones under the naked eye, the appearance of the bones under the microscope, and a vitamin D test. The vitamin D test, if you'll recall, was so low, the level was so low, that it was below the ability of the test to pick it up.
The prosecution gave a rebuttal to the defense's closing arguments, mentioning again the 50 injuries Hazel's autopsy turned up, all of them at various stages of healing.
The defense would have you believe that the head trauma is just a coincidence. That multiple bruises, just a coincidence. 50 blows, just a coincidence. Multiple fractures, just a coincidence. Hand burn, just a coincidence. Serious chemical alkaline burn, just a coincidence. Bruising noticed by Hazel's cousin, just a coincidence. Bruising noticed by the defendant's best friend, just a coincidence.
He also cast doubt on the integrity of the defense's star expert witness, Dr. Satish Chandru, a forensic pathologist from Texas who was paid $30,000 to review the case, travel to Washington, and testify in person.
Dr. Chandru testified that he can't tell if an injury is inflicted or accidental, but then he proceeded to correlate all of Hazel's injuries to accidents or trauma inflicted by EMTs or doctors. You can't have it both ways. He ignored evidence as well. He reached for an explanation to support the defendant's version of events. For instance, Kamee's attempt to dislodge food by patting Hazel on the back is incompatible with bruising and substantial trauma to Hazel's low back.
Brandon was present in the courtroom during the closing arguments. While photos and videos of Hazel were shown as exhibits, the courtroom could hear him sobbing. When the jury was sent to deliberate, the court instructed them that a person commits the crime of homicide by abuse if, under circumstances manifesting an extreme indifference to human life, the person causes the death of a child or person under 16 years of age. and the person has previously engaged in a pattern or practice of assault or torture of the child or person under 16 years of age. During the weekend after the jury was sent for deliberations, one juror was forced to leave due to an unexpected event. Because that person had to be replaced, deliberations had to begin all over again on Monday morning. On Tuesday, June 28th, the jury sent notice that they had reached a verdict on one of Kamee's charges but not the other. Judge David Freeman mulled over what to do before deciding to order the jury to continue deliberating, saying, "This is a very unusual circumstance that I have not encountered previously."
We're in a 3-month trial and less than 2 days of formal deliberations since we reconstituted the jury on Monday morning. So I think it's appropriate to send them back for further deliberations at this point.
2 days later, the jury finally returned with a verdict, finding 30-year-old Kamee Nicole Dixon guilty of homicide by abuse. The jury was still unable to reach a unanimous verdict and was therefore deadlocked on the second-degree murder charge, on which Judge Freeman declared a mistrial. The jury also found that Kamee used her position of trust or responsibility to commit the crime of homicide by abuse, and that she should have known 3-year-old Hazel was vulnerable or incapable of resistance. Interestingly, Kamee Dixon was the first person to be tried by the Whatcom County Prosecutor's Office for the crime of homicide by abuse, which has existed as a criminal charge since 1987. At 95 days in length, Kamee's was also the longest-known criminal jury trial in the county's history. Hazel's Aunt Ashley spoke to a Q13 reporter after the verdict, saying she had a hard time coming face-to-face with her brother.
I can't wrap my head around how he would fight for his girlfriend's freedom when she is the one that murdered his biological daughter. Hazel has been our number one, and that is what we have fought for, and I am so thankful for the jury members, for the prosecutors and their solid case with this, the advocates, everybody, because they have all helped our family to be able to get through this.
Hazel's great-aunt, Tara Reynolds, also talked to a reporter about how the family planned to lobby for change within DCYF.
The system is broken in Washington State, and how we protect children in vulnerable situations, and there needs to be changes. We don't need any other child to be lost because the state dropped the ball in protecting her.
After the verdict, the Bellingham Police Department released the following statement. "We want to thank the jury for their dedicated service during the longest trial in Whatcom County history. While one of the most important duties as residents of this county, it is undoubtedly a sacrifice to spend 95 days in court listening to testimony given by witnesses detailing the murder of a 3-year-old child. It could not have been easy, and we appreciate their service to reach the verdict of guilty. To the Whatcom County Prosecuting Attorney's Office and the BPD Detective Division, especially the lead detective for this case, we cannot thank you enough for standing alongside Hazel's family and being Hazel's voice." After the verdict was delivered, both the defense and prosecuting attorneys spoke with a half-dozen or so jurors, during which the judge left the courtroom. Whatcom County Prosecutor Eric J. Ritchie told the Cascadia Daily News that he thought the second-degree murder charge would likely be dismissed. He hoped the verdict would provide the community with some relief that justice had been found for Hazel. "It's important that our community comes together and does the work that we do to make sure that people are held accountable. This office is feeling the same relief." On July 6th, Kamee's attorneys submitted a motion for a new trial, claiming the jurors did not fully understand the definition of torture, which thereby jeopardized Kamee's right to a fair trial. In the motion, Attorney Douglas Hildahl wrote that the jurors had difficulty defining torture, saying, "They were essentially left to their own devices to come up with a meaning for the term." He added that at least 4 of the jurors the defense spoke to considered Kamee's failure to get medical treatment for Hazel as torture. Court documents show that the jurors submitted a question during initial deliberations on June 24th, asking, "What is the definition we should consider for torture?" The judge responded, "The court's instructions are complete. During your deliberations, you must consider the instructions as a whole." Mr. Hildahl wrote in the motion that failure to obtain medical care is not defined as torture under Washington state law. In addition, he claimed the evidence presented at trial did not show Kamee failed to obtain medical treatment for Hazel, or that Kamee was responsible for Hazel's medical care. He wrote that the court should grant Kamee a new trial because an error of law occurred, that the verdict was contradictory to the law and evidence, and that substantial justice had not been done. Prosecutor Stigmar filed a response to the motion on July 13th, saying the defense failed to show an error was made and that any such error affected the result of the case. He argued that the thought processes and comments of the jury during deliberation become part of the verdict and should not be used when deciding whether or not to grant a motion for a new trial. He added that there was insufficient feedback from the jury to draw any meaningful conclusions about their deliberations. He also argued that the judge's response to the jury's question about the definition of torture was legally correct and did not create a substantial error that affected the defendant's right to a fair trial. Kamee's sentencing, which was originally scheduled for July 14th, was moved back to August 2nd. At a hearing on the motion on July 18th, Whatcom County Superior Court Judge David Freeman ruled that the jury was properly informed and that there was no need to further define the term torture, which he said was not a technical term that required definition. He added that any attempt to further define the term using the defense's requested definition would most likely only have confused the jury more. He then denied Kamee's motion for a new trial. Also in July, Hazel's maternal aunt, Ashley Barnes, who had been faithfully posting updates about the case from day one, posted on Facebook about Kamee's upcoming sentencing. In part, Ashley's post read, "I truly, without a doubt, believe that Hazel was placed in the right hands from the beginning. The doctors and medical staff at Harborview were incredible and treated Hazel with so much love and compassion while she was there. From the prosecution team who fought like hell and went through so many motions and delays to get the justice for Hazel she deserves, to the jurors that came in and sacrificed their own time and money to be able to attend a 3-month trial that probably brought them some secondhand trauma after seeing everything, but they withstood it all and found her guilty. Even after that, KD tried to ask for a new trial, and God said nope." At Kamee's 2-hour sentencing hearing on Tuesday, August 2nd, 2022, family members and friends wearing Hazel Warriors t-shirts bearing photos of the 3-year-old gave victim impact statements describing Hazel as a happy, deeply loved little girl who gave big, warm hugs. Aunt Ashley Barnes said,
"I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm heartbroken. And no matter what sentence she gets, it's never going to be enough because I'll never have Hazel back."
Grandfather Jason Peterson said,
"I'll never have another day out in the grass. I'll never go to another playground. And 57 years to me doesn't seem long enough."
Brandon Homan continued to defend Kamee. Via video conference, Brandon said,
"You should know that you should show mercy because this was a complicated situation. I ask you not to add more tragedy to this tragic situation. I ask that you not follow the prosecutor's recommendation. I have lost so much already. Please don't take any more from me."
Asking the judge to impose a sentence of 57 years based on the evidence in the case, Senior Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Gordon Jenkins told the court that Hazel's death was beyond the scope of a tragedy. Tragedy implies an accident, a mistake, a horrific act of God. Hazel's death was not the result of negligence or an accident. Hazel died after repeated intentional abusive acts by the defendant that came after months of being bruised, broken, and burned. That all culminated in repeated blows to the head, causing a traumatic brain injury and death. This was not a mistake. This was not an error. This was not a lapse in judgment. It was homicide by abuse. Attorney Douglas Hildahl said during the hearing, "This was a difficult case for everyone that was involved. It was long, contentious, neither side gave an inch, but that does not mean that an aggravated sentence is called for. It simply means this was a very difficult case. I can tell the court that Kamee is despondent over the entire situation. Contrary to what counsel has said, Hazel was not an emblem or tool. She was not a symbol. She was a very real child who Kamee loved and did her best to take care of." The defense attorney argued that the court should sentence justly, saying that the jury did find Kamee guilty of homicide by abuse, but did not find that she intentionally assaulted Hazel on November 27, 2019. Mr. Hildahl said the evidence paints a picture of a young woman who took on more than she could handle and who became overwhelmed, whose temper and frustration got the better of her, and who responded wrongly, resulting in a tragic loss of life. Finally, Judge David Freeman said he found it appropriate to sentence Kamee above the standard range of 22 to 29 years in prison, but thought 57 years was not warranted. The judge sentenced Kamee to 34 years in prison, which is still considered an exceptional sentence at 5 years longer than the outer edge of the standard range, plus 3 years of supervised release.
Ms. Dixon abused a position of power to commit the offense, and second, Hazel was a particularly vulnerable victim.
Kamee's charge of second-degree murder was dismissed without prejudice, meaning she could potentially be prosecuted for the charge in the future. Kamee Nicole Dixon, Washington Department of Corrections inmate number 433768, is incarcerated in the Washington Corrections Center for Women in Gig Harbor, Washington. In a statement posted to its Facebook page after Kamee's sentencing, the Whatcom County Prosecuting Attorney's Office said, "The Whatcom County Prosecutor's Office urged the court to impose 57 years in prison, based on the jury finding that the victim was particularly vulnerable and that the defendant abused a position of trust. We believe 57 years would have been a fair and just sentence, but we understand that sentencing is the court's purview and respect the court's authority. We are obviously saddened by this case, but thank all of those who keep the victim's memory alive. In remembrance, we would like to ask the community to be vigilant and to immediately report suspected abuse of children." Interestingly, when Kamee's grandfather, Richard Dixon, died in 2021, his obituary mentioned Kamee among his surviving relatives with Brandon as her partner. It also mentioned that Richard was preceded in death by great-granddaughter Hazel Homan. Reportedly, Kamee's son is now safe, loved, and well cared for. There are some who believe Kamee was wrongfully convicted of Hazel's murder, claiming that a huge amount of evidence from the defense was not allowed to be presented at trial, and that multiple defense witnesses were not allowed to testify. After weighing both sides, I think I've told Hazel's story as fairly as possible using the resources available to me. Hazel's family keeps a memorial for her on and around a light pole on the corner of Woburn and Texas Streets in Bellingham. If you're not able to visit, you can actually see the memorial on Google Street View. Now, as I like to do whenever possible, I'll end the episode by telling you who Hazel was and how we should remember her. Hazel was an adorable little girl with long brown hair, chipmunk cheeks, and big brown eyes. Her family called her Hazelbug. She was shy, but when she came out of her shell, she was a silly, goofy little girl. Hazel loved chicken nuggets, singing, dancing, and reading books. She also loved her stuffies, especially ponies, which she played with on the floor for hours. While living with her grandparents, Hazel loved grabbing Tammy and Dale's phones to take videos or selfies. Hazel also enjoyed going to the zoo and looking at the animals. According to a GoFundMe created after Hazel's death, she is the sweetest baby and brings joy to everyone she ever meets. Hazel loves her family, and her family adores her. She is such a character. One story is of her inserting herself into books that are being read to her so she can be part of the action. If anyone sneezed or coughed, she would say in her cute little voice, "You okay?" Hazel's obituary read, "Hazel Journey Homan was a miracle child since the day she was born. You instantly fell in love with her the second she looked at you with those big, beautiful brown eyes and long eyelashes. She was the most loving, precious little girl and lit up every room she walked into. She was always smiling and loved to sing and dance. Matter of fact, every family member probably still has the Baby Shark song stuck in their head in her cute, innocent voice. She was a blessing from God, and we thank Him every day for sharing such a special child with our family. Even though she left us way too soon, Hazel will live on as an organ donor who was able to bless 3 other families." Just so you can hear Hazel's little voice, her Aunt Ashley shared this video with me of Hazel singing the Baby Shark song. Next week, we'll hear from 2 special guests. This past week, I spoke with Stephanie, the jury foreperson in Kamee Dixon's trial, whose first ever experience with jury duty was a 3-month-long murder trial for a 3-year-old girl. I also had the honor of talking to Hazel's aunt, Ashley Barnes, who will never let her precious niece's memory fade. My sources for this episode were KIRO7, the City of Bellingham website, Child Abuse and Neglect, the International Journal, Volume 25, Issue 11, November 2001, the Bellingham Herald, Science Direct, Fox 13, Chip Chick, The Dreamin' Demon, Facebook, the Cascadia Daily News, Westford Funeral Home and Cremation Service, GoFundMe, KGMI, Law and Crime, the Sunnyside Sun, the Whatcom County Prosecuting Attorney's Office Facebook page, police and DCYF reports, court documents, the Iowa Courts Online Search Portal, the Iowa Department of Corrections website, the Washington Courts Online Search Portal, and the Washington Department of Corrections website. That's it for this week. Join me next week for part 2 of Hazel's story. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes or become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter and TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook and Instagram. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. All music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlechildren.pod@gmail.com. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. If you see something, say something. Until next week, bye everyone.